History of Aquaculture. Aquaculture is the process of growing, raising fish, shellfish, or other aquatic animals or plants in controlled environment. It is an important part of the global food and seafood supplies. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations (FAO) organized farm-raised seafood as a key source to grow the global food supply to feed the increasing world population. 4000 BCE Europe, Neolithic Age, evidence of trapping wild aquatic animals in lagoons, ponds, or small swallow lakes. 3500 BC, China, evidence of aquaculture practice such as using silkworm feast and nymphs to feed carp raised in ponds on silkworm farms and the integration of raising carps in ponds and rice culture. Some date the fish and rice culture integration back even further up to 6000 BC. 2000 BC, Japan, oyster farming. 1400 BC, China record of criminal prosecutions of fish thieves. In 475 BC, China earliest known monograph Pan Li Yang Yoqing on fish culture published. In 300 BC, India.
2011, production of farm fish surpasses that of beef for the first time in the modern era. 60 million tons of farm food fish versus 57 million tons of beef according to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. 1880s, France. Oyster larvae collected on strings on tiles, placed into the water, and then larvae transplanted to protected beds to grown out. U.S. oyster farming on the Atlantic coast. On 1812, U.S. curriculum in aquaculture established for undergrads at Cornell. 1853, U.S. Ohio trout farm run by Theodatus Garlick and H.A. Ackley is the first in the U.S. to artificially fertilize its fish eggs. 1870, U.S. The American Fish Culturist Association formed in New York, name change in 1878 to the American Fish Culture Association and again in 1884 to the American Fisheries Society. 1872, U.S. California. Salmon culture starts as hatcheries to supplement wild fish stocks. 1897, U.S. A manual of fish culture published by the U.S. Commission of Fish and Fisheries. Manual deals mainly with hatcheries for the production of fish to stock game waters but includes a little on food species of fish, oysters, and clams. 1990s to 1909, U.S. Idaho. First commercial trout farm in U.S. established. 1910, U.S. Channel catfish farming techniques developed. 1919, U.S. Washington. Pacific oyster from Japan placed in coastal waters starting the oyster farming industry in Washington. 1930s, Asia. Tilapia introduced to Asia. U.S. Federal subsidies for building and stocking fish ponds on farms provided by FDR's Farm Pen program. 1940s, tilapia introduced to Caribbean, Latin America, and U.S. 1950s, following the end of WWII, demand for fish in developed nations increases, making the idea of large-scale aquaculture possible. U.S. Catfish culture developed as an industry. Japan. Start of net pen aquaculture for yellowtail. 1960s. Asia. Aquaculture begins to develop on commercial scale. Denmark, intensive commercial rainbow trout farming developed and started to spread throughout. Europe, Japan, floating cages developed. Europe, first commercial salmon farms in Norway and Scotland. 1970s, North America, commercial salmon farming expand to US and Canada. 1976, New Zealand, first commercial salmon farm in New Zealand. 1980, US, National Aquaculture Act of 1980 passed to provide for development of aquaculture industry. In 1999, production of farm salmon exceeds amount of salmon caught in the wild for first time. In 1990s to 20s, early development of land-based tank and recirculating aquaculture. 2011, production of farm fish surpasses that of beef for the first time in the modern era. 60 million tons of farm food fish versus 57 million tons of beef according to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. 2012, about 600 species are used in aquaculture in about 190 countries according to the FAO or Food and Agriculture Organization. 2013, consumption of farm-raised fish surpasses that of wild fish, including shellfish, for the first time.
A tilapia shown in an Egyptian pier circa 2000 BC. The Gundit Mara people engineered channels to bring water and young eels from Darlot's Creek to low-lying areas. They created ponds and wetlands linked by channels containing weirs. Woven baskets were placed in a weir to harvest mature eels. Ancient Egyptians devised a land reclamation method around 2000 BCE, which is still highly productive, reclaiming over 50,000 of saline soils and supporting over 10,000 families.
100 BCE, Romans built coastal aquaculture ponds and raised carps in fish ponds. Aristotle recommended the culture of carps. Romans also cultivated oyster. Romans living outside of Rome added fish pond called steer to their plantation and are credited with the first fish pond in England.
Before long, with the technology advanced over time, the habitat method by which a great number of oyster could be harvested was established. The first true Hawaiian fish pond were probably built during the later half of the 15th century. The increasingly thereafter, as chief could command the labor necessary to transport the tons of rock and coral used in the enclosing walls. These ponds, which yielded several hundred pounds of fish per ark annually, were not only feats of engineering technology, but reflected chiefly power and were a major symbol of the intensification of agriculture and aquaculture production.
Oyster farming was practiced by the ancient Romans as early as the 1st century BC on the Italian peninsula. With the barbarian invasions, the oyster farming in the Mediterranean and the Atlantic came to an end. In 1852, Monsieur de Beaune started to reseed the oyster beds by collecting the oyster spawn using makeshift catchers. An important step to the modern oyster farming was the oyster farm built by Hyacinthe Boeuf in the Elly-de-Ré. After obtaining the rights to a part of the coast, he built a wall to make a reservoir and to break the strength of the current. Sometime later, the wall was covered with spot, coming continuously from the sea, which gave 2,000 baby oyster per square meter.